From the first breath, the mind hushes. A single truth lays itself bare, that every dream we chase is a shadow cast by our own longing, and longing itself ripples with suffering. The viewer sits in a room without light, held by a voice that will not lull, that does not promise, rescue only clarity. Once the lid of illusion lifts, suffering becomes palpable, not as enemy, but as messenger. In the hush now, we feel the weight of existence shining through the tender breakdown of wishful thought. We glimpse how modernity, its innovation, its convenience, spins a web of distraction. Screens flicker, stimuli beckon, yet substance drains away. The false comfort of progress masks a greater void, and in that void the will screams. Yet the will is insatiable, never satiated, always pressing forward into ever deeper emptiness. Listen, the world tells you that dreams are to be seized, but hidden in that imperative lies the trap. The more you run, the more you fall into the gravity of desire. Ambition becomes crucible. You forge yourself in its heat, but you lose the quiet core. Every accomplishment builds a stronger cage. The cage glitters, and the glitter blinds you to your own imprisonment. And so pain arrives, not as punishment, but as signal. You cannot look away. You feel the dull ache of meaninglessness when your trophies turn to dust. You sense the collapse of identity when the outer markers vanish. You awaken to a strange realization. Suffering is the only faithful companion in a world built on illusions. It is not the failure of the will, it is the metaphysical pulse that beats underneath its failure. Pause 2 minutes of imagery. A traveler climbing a mountain only to see another higher peak loom ahead. The sun rising not to liberate, but to cast sharper shadows. A release, then, in seeing that the journey never ends, and the end is not in sight. In that release, your soul inhales the simple fact. There is no final victory, only surrender. Now the physician's hand presses on the wound. You understand that desire pretends to be movement, but it is merely restlessness projected into action. You thought you were building yourself, but you were digging deeper trenches of dissatisfaction. You ran to escape emptiness, only to carry it within. Let this recognition unfold like a slow dusk. We wander through the cultural illusions, the promise of connection through digital networks that only amplify loneliness, the anthem of self-improvement that insists on perpetual becoming while eroding being, the spiritual marketplaces that sell salvation in brief escapes. Behind each banner of more lies the same quiet trap, the ego's unwillingness to rest. Yet, in that restlessness, there is opportunity for awareness to rise. When release arrives, it is not euphoric, but sober. You feel a subtle shift, not guilt, not rebound, but a clarity that suffering is integral. You glimpse that to suffer is to be alive, and that alive is worth bearing. The sweet relief lies not in escaping pain, but in seeing pain as mirror. Another emotional opening, now 3 minutes of recognition. A person letting go of the narrative that they must always climb. You hear the empty chants of culture fade in your mind. You follow nothing, but simply watch following. You breathe the bare air around the fortress of your illusions and recognize their architecture. No promise of solace beyond the moment, because the moment itself is truth. In the silence left behind, you find solitude, not abandonment, but space. Space to sense that the will, untamed, is its own suffering. Space to feel that the ego's construction is frail. Space to rest in the absence of story. Here, awareness does not comfort, it reveals. Slowly, a new voice surges not of hope, but of clarity. You see that the very structure of dream chasing arises from a fading, unacknowledged ache. When desire falls silent, suffering remains but as witness, not as tormentor. And you learn that the only path across suffering is to let it pass through the witness that is your being. This is not an invitation to bliss, only to honesty. And in that honesty there is a quiet dignity. You do not become someone else. You simply cease fighting what island your deepest dream unveiled is just another mask. When it falls, you stand naked, not triumphant, but true. Here the words dissolve into stillness. The viewer does not applaud nor uplift. They remain in the room still, quiet, present with suffering as companion, clarity as light, and surrender as final resonance. Suffering is not an anomaly. It is not a deviation from the path, it is the path. To live is to be nailed to the cross of wanting. Even in the stillest moment, the breath stirs with lack. Hunger may quiet, but the appetite of the will remains, gnawing through every respite. We do not escape it. By fulfilling desire, we only wake deeper into its machinery. The world does not veil itself out of cruelty, but because its nature is veil. Appearances seduce us with beauty, form, and promise. Yet behind each figure, we find no resting truth, only the restless urge to seek another. What we call beauty is the will's way of softening the trap. We are drawn to what will consume us, and when we reach it, we find not peace, but the old emptiness in a new shape. To want is to suffer, but to have is not peace, only a momentary disorientation before new suffering begins. Every possession reminds us of impermanence. Every achievement echoes with the sound of what remains unachieved. The will is not satisfied by victory, it is inflamed by it. The summit does not still us, it merely reveals the higher peaks yet to conquer. And yet, when we truly stop, we feel the hollow, not as punishment, but as the structure of being itself. That hollow is not failure, it is the undoing of false scaffolding. It is what remains when illusion dies. In the hollow, we no longer ask for meaning, we begin to perceive the silence beneath the asking. Modern life feeds us the narcotic of distraction. We are sold endless novelty, stimulation, affirmation, but each serves only to defer the encounter with ourselves. The ego grows bloated, but the soul becomes starved. And in this starvation we grow desperate, mistaking movement for transformation, mistaking noise for being alive. We scroll, we consume, we perform. And yet, in the quiet spaces between, a question rises, uninvited. Is this all? The soul knows the answer before the mind dares speak it. What we chase is not life, but anesthesia. What we fear is not death, but awareness. To see clearly is to feel the ache beneath all becoming. The child cries without knowing why. The adult buries that cry in purpose, in plans, in pretense. But beneath both is the same wound. To exist is to lack, and to lack is to suffer. Even love, that most sacred mirage, is shadowed by its opposite. To attach is to bind oneself to loss. To hope is to invite disillusionment. And yet we return, again and again, as moth to flame. Perhaps there is no answer, because there is no question. Only a will that stirs and struggles and sings its song through flesh and thought and ruin. And when that will subsides, what remains is not a solution, but a silence. Not a joy, but a stillness. This is not despair. It is the absence of deceit, a clearing of the fog. Detachment is not escape. It is not superiority. It is the quiet refusal to keep chasing what wounds us. It is not indifference, but clarity. The detachment of the sage is not coldness. It is the warmth that arises when one no longer burns from within. When the fire of desire dies down, the soul can finally see the stars. We mistake identity for essence, but we are not our name, not our story, not even our choices. We are the space in which all of that arises and falls. And that space is neither heroic nor tragic. It's simply island. The ego resists this truth, for it thrives on becoming. But the self behind the self breathes a different air, one that is thinner, colder, and infinitely more real. In solitude, this truth approaches, not in the silence of external quiet, but the internal cessation of striving. When there is nothing left to prove, nothing to win, nothing to build, then one stands before life as it is, raw, fleeting, indifferent. And in that recognition, one does not collapse, one dissolves. Pain is not the villain, it is the revealer. Through it, we see what we cling to, what we fear, what we lie about. Pain peels away the costume, and when all masks fall, what remains is the bare soul trembling, unguarded, finally awake. Let the world continue, let its wheels turn, but step aside from the machinery. Do not resist it, do not condemn it, simply see it for what it island, a theater of shadows, a river of dreams. And within it, the quiet watcher yourself, neither striving nor fleeing, only being. That is enough, and more than enough. To look at others is to see the same torment reflected through different masks. Joy is loud, but short-lived. Suffering on the other hand, speaks in whispers and lingers. The smile conceals a trembling hope that things will not fall apart, yet they always do. The handshake, the laughter, the ambition, all are temporary wards against the silence that waits beneath. And that silence is patient. It does not pursue, it allows. It knows that all things return to it. The so-called success of life is merely the temporary postponement of its despair. Those who rise highest often fall with more sound, for they believed the illusion was real. But even the lowest, those who never left the ground, suffer the torment of hope, the idea that something better could have been, that their hunger is a mistake rather than the inevitable expression of existence itself. We are not punished by the world. We are born into punishment, not for sin, but for being. Life does not owe us peace. It simply is, and we are thrown into it without consent, without knowledge, without armor. The child does not ask to be born. The infant does not wish for the will. Yet the will enters, igniting the ceaseless pull toward what is always just out of reach. Desire does not rest. It invents. When one hunger is stilled, another arises. Not because we are ungrateful, but because the nature of the will is never to end. It invents purpose, identity, legacy, illusions that pass for meaning but only serve to dress the naked fact of existence in comforting robes. We chase these ghosts not because we believe in them, but because we fear what lies beneath them, nothing. And yet, that nothing is not absence, it is release. It is the end of pretending, the end of measuring one's worth by outcome. In that space, unadorned by narrative, we see that the world moves, not with malice, but with indifference. The rain does not fall to cleanse or to curse. It simply falls. The storm does not arrive to teach, to destroy, or to transform. It arrives because it must. The wise do not resist the storm. They do not shake their fists at the rain. They allow. And in that allowing, they begin to unchain themselves from the wheel. The wheel of becoming, of chasing, of naming and claiming and suffering again. They no longer seek to leave a mark upon the world, for they know the world erases all marks. Time is the eraser of all ambition. One sees the statues of heroes crumbling, the books of visionaries rotting, the graves of lovers covered by weeds. And in that seeing, something lets go. Not cynicism, but lucidity. A serenity that does not depend on outcome, but only on clarity. And in that clarity, detachment blossoms not as coldness, but as deep inner rest. What is left to pursue when even memory fades? What is left to defend when all form decays? What remains when even the self is seen as a temporary aggregation of impressions, urges, fears? Only presence. Not the kind spoken of in books or whispered in spiritual markets, but the bleak, unyielding presence of existence without justification. There is no final reward. No crown awaits the weary. There is no awakening that frees us from suffering, only the awakening that reveals it more fully. That sees suffering not as an enemy to be slain, but as the natural scent of the soul's burning. We burn not because we are impure, but because we are alive. And in that fire, the illusions we cherish are slowly consumed. Grief becomes holy. Loneliness becomes a doorway. Fear becomes a kind of prayer. Not to gods, but to reality itself. A silent plea to be allowed to see without being destroyed. And slowly, we are not destroyed, but dissolved. The edges of the self blur. The ego ceases its panicked climb. The will flickers, and in that flicker, we see eternity. Do not misunderstand, this is not freedom. Freedom is just another mask. This is surrender, not to a higher power, but to what island? Surrender to the futility, to the decay, to the endless unfolding of life that does not care for your dreams. And in that surrender, there is peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of truth. You were not made to be happy. You were made to exist. And existing carries with it the full weight of anguish and awe. Those who tell you otherwise are selling anesthesia. But you are here to wake. And in waking, to bear witness to the terrible, beautiful emptiness that holds us all. Let the dream go, let the noise fade, let the will tremble and finally fall silent. Then, and only then, does the soul begin to see. The soul that begins to see does not rejoice. It does not celebrate its clarity with declarations or flags. It only sees, and that seeing changes everything. Not because the world alters, but because the gaze no longer demands, no longer hunts for affirmation, no longer flinches from pain. The world remains indifferent, but now the soul has ceased begging it to be otherwise. To know is to grieve. This is the first secret. All true knowledge leads downward, not into despair, but into gravity. One descends into the weight of things, into the heaviness of being, and in that descent, the lightness of illusion burns away. The balloon of hope, once so inflated with promises, shrivels in your hands, until you are left only with what does not leave: silence, solitude, and the pulse of the real. The more one sees, the less one speaks. The voice grows slow, measured, like someone tracing the edge of a wound, not yet healed. There is no urgency now, because there is nowhere to go. There is no better version of the self waiting around the corner. The chase ends, and the cost of that chase begins to be counted in lost years, in hollow victories, in the exhaustion of perpetual becoming. The world is not against you. It is simply not for you. Its motions are not your story. Its turning does not heed your cries. And this is not cruelty, it is indifference. The ocean does not rage because you are drowning. The sun does not shine to warm your skin. To think otherwise is the vanity of the will, projecting purpose onto chaos. But when that projection fades, what remains is stillness. The stillness of things being what they are. And that is enough. There is no redemption arc, no heroic return, just the slow disintegration of pretense. You no longer need to convince yourself of anything, not your worth, not your future, not even your identity. These were scaffolds built to survive the storm. But now, as you sit in the quiet after the tempest, you realize the storm was within, and the scaffolds were only ever temporary. What is the self, once all striving has ceased? A vessel, a window, perhaps even a wound, but one that no longer tries to close. And in remaining open, it allows the world to pass through without clinging, without naming, without war. There is no joy in this, and yet there is no suffering either. Only the bare intimacy of what island? Some will ask. What remains if we abandon hope? But hope is not nourishment, it is hunger dressed in future tense. Hope feeds on what is not yet, and by doing so, consumes the present. It dangles a better tomorrow, only to leave today hollow. But when hope dies, something unexpected is born, presence. Not a joyful presence, but a full one. Heavy, grounded, unblinking. This presence does not flee from ugliness. It does not beautify suffering, nor romanticize ruin. It sees the corpse, the ash, the decay, and does not flinch. It sees the mother weeping over the child that will never breathe again. It sees the old man talking to shadows that no longer remember him. It sees, and it remains. This is the strange courage of awareness. Even love, the great seducer of the soul, must be unmasked. For love, too, is often longing in disguise, a reaching for completion, a balm against the void. But love born of clarity asks for nothing. It does not bind, does not demand reciprocation. It simply sees and allows. It grieves, but does not cling. It suffers, but does not expect. Such love is rare, and perhaps it is not even love, only recognition. The will trembles at this place. It cannot survive here. It looks for angles, for paths back to desire, for new illusions to dress in meaning. But the soul, once quieted, will not return to the noise. It has tasted truth, not a truth that liberates, but a truth that sobers, that strips you down to what you have always been beneath the masks. Time continues its erosion. It takes your name, your strength, your memory. It leaves you with less each year. But if you have ceased resisting, this loss is not tragedy, it is freedom. The less you carry, the less you are. And the less you are, the closer you come to that nameless space from which all things arise, and to which all things return. You are not your story, you are not your pain, you are not even your insights. You are the space in which these things flicker. They come and go, you remain. And in that remaining, there is peace. Not the peace of satisfaction, but the peace of surrender. You no longer fight the river. You no longer demand that it flow a different way. You simply let it carry you, not toward any shore, but toward dissolution. This, perhaps, is the final mercy of the real. It does not lie, it does not offer comfort, but it offers rest, not in death, but in the death of illusion, not in happiness, but in the end of craving. You do not transcend the world, you dissolve into it, quietly, finally, without a name. The illusion that dies last is the illusion of self. We hold to it with the tenacity of those who fear the abyss, not because we understand what the self is, but because we fear what might remain without it. From childhood we are given a name, a face, a lineage, scaffolding on which we drape our identity. And yet, beneath each of these layers, we find not substance, but flux, a shifting tide of impressions, cravings, fears, none of which hold still long enough to be called I. Suffering, in its relentless honesty, reveals this. When pain arrives, it cares nothing for our narrative. It devours titles, shatters images, unmakes the myth of control. In agony, the king and the beggar are indistinguishable. The will does not recognize status, it only recognizes lack, and that lack cries out through every form. What we call identity is the clotting of suffering around memory. It is not built from joy, but from wounds. We are most sure of who we are when we are most in pain. And so we return to it, again and again, because it anchors us in a world without anchor. But this identity is not freedom, it is habit, a loop, a repetition of the will seeking itself through mirrored suffering. There are those who never question, who move through life clinging to their illusions as if they were life rafts. But those who suffer deeply are given a terrible gift. They see the ocean. They see that the rafts do not float, that the water is endless, and that no one is coming. And in that recognition, they stop threshing. They allow the water to carry them, not towards salvation, but towards stillness. Stillness is not silence. It is not peace in the way we imagine it. It is the absence of resistance. The moment when the will ceases to demand that life be otherwise. In that moment, the world does not change, we do. We no longer seek explanation, only awareness. We no longer pray for relief, only the strength to see. Most do not want to see. Vision costs comfort. To open the inner eye is to forfeit all false light. The sun becomes too bright and shadows more vivid. You begin to see joy for what it often is, a flickering defense against despair. You begin to see connection as fleeting and love as a wound we choose again and again. And still you remain. Not because you are strong, but because you are too tired to pretend. Exhaustion, when true, is not collapse, it is awakening. The body may sag, but the soul sits upright. It watches the crumbling edifice of dreams and does not rush to rebuild. It allows the ruins to stand, broken and beautiful. For in ruins there is truth. The truth that all structures fall, that no fortress can hold against time, that even memory, the most tenacious architect, eventually fails. And what then? When even memory falters, when your name becomes a sound others forget, and your deeds fade into the dust of the unremarkable, you remain, not as presence, but as absence, not as a legacy, but as a clearing. In that clearing, there is no meaning, only space. A space wide enough for suffering to pass through, unimpeded, untransformed. Detachment is not escape from the world, but entry into it without armor. It is not denial of pain, but the refusal to personalize it. You no longer say, I suffer, but only suffering arises. You do not resist the grief, you watch it come, you feel its weight, and you let it pass. This is not numbness, but intimacy without possession. We possess nothing, not our lives, not our loves, not even our bodies. All is borrowed and all returns. To live with this awareness is to live gently. You do not clutch. You do not demand permanence. You walk among impermanent things with reverence, not entitlement. You touch the world the way one touches a flame briefly, knowing it will burn. And it does burn. Everything burns. This is not metaphor. It is the condition of being. What begins must end, and every form is already in decline. To see this without bitterness is the rarest form of vision. It does not numb you, it breaks you open, not with despair, but with the sacred heaviness of the real. There is no freedom in detachment, only clarity, only the cold relief of no longer chasing phantoms. You sit beside the river of time and no longer try to build a dam. You do not leap into the current. You do not scream for the past. You simply sit, And in that sitting, something ancient stirs not peace, but the trace of something deeper, a recognition not of meaning, but of necessity. Things are as they are. Suffering comes because it must. Death comes because it must. And in the face of this, the soul says not why only yes, not as consent, but as acceptance, not as defeat, but as the stillness that follows after the will has broken. This is not the end, but it is the place where ends no longer matter. At the edge of all things, the voice falters, not in weakness, but in reverence. Words become heavier here, as if weighed down by the nearness of silence. The breath shortens. The illusions have fallen away, one by one, and now, even the voice itself knows it must vanish. There is no lesson to offer, only presence. A presence that does not declare itself, that does not ask to be known. It simply is like wind through the bare branches of winter, like the last ember cooling in the ashes of a long dead fire. What remains is not hope, but the absence of need. And in this absence, everything becomes visible, not in clarity of outline, but in the truth of its dissolving. The hand that once reached now rests. The eyes that once searched now close, not from blindness, but from seeing enough. The heart that once clung to names, to faces, to futures, now beats without urgency. It has given up nothing, yet lost everything it once imagined was its own. There is a strange serenity in the knowledge that nothing can be held, that every beloved thing will be taken, not out of cruelty, but because all form passes. Even the self, which once felt so central, so persistent, is revealed as a ripple in the water. The ripple fades, the water remains. You no longer fear this. You no longer wish to escape it. The idea of escape was another illusion, a last trick of the will to survive itself. But survival is not the highest aim. Not when survival means clinging to illusions, to a world that never stays still, to a self that is always fragmenting. No, the highest aim is not to endure, but to cease resisting the transience of all things. You look back, not with longing, but with understanding. Every pain had its place. Every moment of despair was a doorway. Every dream that betrayed you, necessary, for they carved away the layers, they burned down the scaffolds. They brought you here, to this moment of bare being. There is no grandeur in it, no triumph, just the slow, solemn vanishing of what you thought was you, and now you feel it. The soft disintegration, the mind letting go of its stories, the heart releasing its grip on permanence, the soul settling into the earth of what island, not escaping upward, not rising beyond, but descending into the simplicity of the real, into the groundless ground where nothing holds and nothing is needed. The world continues. It hums and moves and decays, but you are no longer caught in its current. You watch, you breathe, you feel the wind pass through what once was called you, and you do not flinch. You do not name. You do not ask. The will has grown quiet, its hunger spent, its illusions seen through, and in that stillness, the final truth appears not as revelation, but as absence, not as light, but as the end of reaching for light. There is no enlightenment, only the falling away of what clouded the already lit. You are not free, you are not bound, you are not anything at all. You are the silence that remains after the voice has vanished, the stillness after the dream ends, the space in which all things arise and dissolve. And you are at peace, not because peace has come, but because you have ceased to flee.